On Berlin, March 17, 1943. The strike of a folder against polished wood shattered the quiet of the Abwehr headquarters like a gunshot. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris didn't flinch, but the porcelain cup at his elbow tipped, a dark ring of coffee spreading across classified reports that could end lives if the Gestapo ever saw them. The admiral stared down at the open folder. The numbers were printed with mechanical precision, each digit slicing through the air like a blade. 1 bomber per hour. That line alone seemed to hum in the room, louder than the ticking clock. A statement so absurd that his first instinct was to laugh. But he didn't, because the hands holding the paper were trembling. Through the tall windows, the canal lay still, black as ink, the same waters where bodies had once been thrown during another revolution. He felt the weight of history pressing against the glass. A factory an ocean away was changing the outcome of this war, and his superiors didn't even know it yet. Major Friedrich Heinz stood rigid in front of the desk, boots perfectly aligned. He had triple-checked the data. Ford's Willow Run facility, mile-long assembly line, 18-ton aircraft, a bomber every hour. He had no explanation for how it was possible, only certainty that it was true. The air in the office was dense, as if the building itself held its breath. Canaris flipped another page. 1 hour? He repeated quietly, as though saying it might make it less impossible. It didn't. The words felt heavier each time, sinking like stones. This wasn't some wild rumor. Intelligence had arrived through trusted networks, Mexican intermediaries, industrial shipments, coded reports. Every channel told the same story. The Americans were forging machines faster than Germany could forge belief. Outside the door, boots clicked in the corridor. Somewhere down the hall, a typewriter clattered. But inside this room, history tilted. Heinz finally spoke. "Herr Admiral, if these figures are real—" "They are," Canaris interrupted. His voice was low but iron-edged. "And if they are, then the war is already decided." He let the silence stretch. Not the silence of indecision, but of recognition. What he held in his hands wasn't merely intelligence. It was prophecy. Canaris straightened the papers and closed the folder with care. "Goering will laugh," he muttered almost to himself. "Hitler will call it propaganda." His jaw tightened. But mathematics doesn't care who believes it. Beyond the walls of Berlin, in a place called Willow Run, bombers were being born like clockwork. Inside Berlin, disbelief was already writing the Third Reich's defeat. 2 years earlier, long before Canaris held that folder, the warning had already arrived. In a smoke-filled meeting room at the Reich Air Ministry, Luftwaffe officers had placed a stack of reports before Hermann Göring. The figures were modest compared to what would come later, but they told a clear story. American aircraft production was climbing at a pace the Reich could not match. Göring had leaned back in his chair, gold rings glittering beneath the lights, and let out a booming laugh that echoed off the walls. "Americans?" he said, slapping the paper with an open palm. "They build refrigerators, not bombers." Around him, officers forced smiles. No one dared correct him. In that room, laughter carried more weight than data. Washington's military attachés, neutral diplomats, and intercepted cables had pointed to production approaching 2,000 aircraft per month. It was credible, verifiable, and intolerable. Göring's mockery wasn't ignorance. It was faith. Faith in a worldview built on racial hierarchy and contempt for democracy. A worldview that could not imagine a nation of factory workers and engineers overwhelming the Reich's war machine. By December 1941, after Pearl Harbor, the warnings became urgent. General Karl Koller had handed Göring a new set of intelligence summaries. He didn't even read them. "They're bluffing," he said, waving his hand as if shooing a fly. "A mongrel nation cannot outbuild us. Their weakness is in their blood." Later, at Wolfschanze, Hitler repeated the same line like scripture. "Democracy makes them soft. Their women, their workers, their Jews, weak links in the chain. They will drown in their own inefficiency." The officers around the table nodded, some out of conviction, others to survive. In that atmosphere, skepticism was dangerous. Doubt was defeatism, and defeatism carried a rope. No one dared ask the obvious question: what if the numbers were true? The Reich built its confidence not on mathematics but on myth. It trusted ideology more than evidence, speeches more than calculations. In that trust lay the seed of disaster, The reports kept coming, quiet, persistent, undeniable. But each warning was buried beneath the laughter of powerful men who believed their enemies were incapable of greatness. History would prove them wrong. Mexico City, February 1943. The reception hall of the German-Mexican Commerce Association glowed with chandeliers and polished marble. Waiters carried trays of tequila and cigars. Businessmen spoke too loudly, and no one noticed the quiet man near the bar memorizing every word. Wolfgang Blau, posing as an Argentine leather merchant, had attended dozens of these soirees. He knew that the most valuable intelligence wasn't whispered in alleys. It spilled out between drinks, coated in laughter. On this night, the man holding the key was Harold Morrison, an American oil executive with a fondness for boasting. He had just returned from Michigan, where Ford had given him a tour of their newest marvel. His voice carried over the music as he lifted his glass. "You can't imagine it," he said. "The line runs for more than a mile. They build bombers like other people build cars." A few guests laughed. "A mile-long factory? Absurd." But Blau didn't laugh. He leaned closer, every detail carving itself into his memory. Morrison spoke of assembly halls so vast that clouds formed inside, of rain falling under a roof. 42,000 workers, men and women, assembling B-24 Liberators with clockwork rhythm. A machine in human form. Morrison grabbed a napkin and a pencil. His hand moved with the ease of a man showing off. "Here," he said, sketching bomb bays, wing sections, converging production lines. They build it in pieces, wings from one side, fuselages from another. Then everything meets like rivers flowing to the sea. Blau tilted his head, feigning polite interest. "Surely something that complex must break down often." Morrison laughed. "That's what the aircraft companies thought. But Ford broke the plane down into 60,000 individual operations. One person, one task. It's like breathing for them. Women who never touched a wrench now install hydraulic lines. Boys run logistics like generals." He didn't know that his casual bragging was already on its way to Berlin. Agents listening from the corner would repeat his words verbatim. In the morning, coded cables would leave the Mexican capital. This was how the truth spread, not through daring spy missions or cinematic break-ins, but through soft light, expensive liquor, and the arrogance of men who assumed no one was listening. For years, German intelligence had cultivated these networks in Mexico City. Businessmen traveled freely between Detroit and the oil fields. Diplomats spoke over cigars. Intercepted letters between American workers and their relatives in neutral countries told the same story. Every line added another piece to the puzzle. Willow Run was real, and its scale was beyond anything the Reich had ever imagined. By the time the intelligence reached Berlin, it had been triple-sourced. Names, shifts, output rates? It wasn't rumor anymore. It was evidence. And yet, inside the upper echelons of power, they would call it propaganda. But for the men in the shadows of Mexico City, the truth was already clear. The Americans weren't just building bombers. They were building the weapon that would decide the war. The truth behind the numbers began not in secret meetings, but in the mind of a single man. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, wasn't a general or a politician. He was a builder, a man who believed that machines, not speeches, would shape the future. When war came, Sorensen looked at the B-24 Liberator and didn't see a bomber. He saw an assembly problem waiting to be solved. In 1940, aircraft were still crafted like fine watches, slow, delicate, dependent on specialists. Sorensen changed that. He stood in a hotel room in San Diego one night, staring at a blank sheet of paper. By morning, he had sketched the blueprint for Willow Run. One moving line, fixed workers, endless flow. Bombers built the way Model Ts once rolled off the line. German intelligence later pieced this story together through intercepted reports, diplomatic receptions, and industrial espionage. In March 1943, Spanish military attaché José Ungría had met Sorensen at a formal gathering in Washington. Sorensen, proud and unguarded, spoke freely to what he believed was a neutral audience. "When we saw how Consolidated built planes," Sorensen said, "they were making them under the sun, each one different from the last. That's not production, that's craft. I don't build art, I build machines." His voice had carried the weight of certainty. He described a mile-long plant where wings and fuselages would converge like arteries into a heart. "We'll build bombers the way we build cars," he said. Precision by repetition. The attaché pressed him gently, pretending to admire the efficiency. Sorensen didn't hesitate. He spoke of apprentice schools training 8,000 workers each week, of women excelling at delicate assembly, of teenagers managing supply flows. Democracy, he said, means using everyone. Reports of that conversation reached Berlin in weeks, corroborated by neutral engineers from Sweden and envoys from Argentina. Every technical detail matched what was heard elsewhere: 42,000 workers, 40 aircraft daily, subassemblies arriving from multiple directions, each meeting at precise coordinates on the production line. It was mechanical choreography on a national scale. German analysts struggled to comprehend it. Factories in the Reich were cramped, specialized, vulnerable to disruption. Willow Run, by contrast, was a city under one roof, a machine that turned steel and labor into bombers with breathtaking speed. For Hitler's Germany, production was supposed to be the realm of genius engineers and master craftsmen. For the United States, it was the work of millions. In Berlin, Canaris studied the reports and understood the meaning. This wasn't simply a factory. It was the embodiment of industrial warfare, a place where ideology was irrelevant and only math mattered. At Willow Run, every hour, a bomber emerged into the daylight. In Germany, disbelief grew louder than the truth. By the spring of 1943, German intelligence no longer had fragments. It had proof. 17 independent sources, each from a different corner of the world, told the same story. Ford's Willow Run was not a myth, not propaganda, but a machine whose scale defied logic. From Madrid, Colonel Jose Ungria's coded cables arrived with meticulous detail, tonnage of aluminum consumed, workforce numbers, the frequency of completed aircraft leaving the line. In Stockholm, Swedish engineer Erik Lundberg sent his own report. Production efficiency defies European understanding. Specialized machines for single tasks, capital investment unimaginable. And from Tokyo, an intercepted transmission from Commander Toshikazu Omi to the Japanese High Command confirmed it bluntly. This single plant produces more aircraft each month than all of Japan combined. The evidence converged like streams feeding an unstoppable river. In the analysis rooms of the Abwehr, officers pinned reports to vast wall maps: Mexico City, Detroit, Stockholm, Madrid, Tokyo. Each line led back to one location in Michigan. Oberstleutnant Nikolaus Ritter, head of Air Intelligence, had once lived in New York and understood the American temperament. He had seen their skyscrapers rise overnight, steel skeletons piercing clouds. When he read the Willow Run data, he didn't question it. He knew what industrial America could do when challenged. If these numbers are real, Ritter told Canaris quietly, then we've already lost. It's only mathematics and time. But in Berlin, mathematics was not the language of power. Ideology was. Canaris reviewed the growing stack of confirmations, each one a stone on his conscience. The data was precise, the sources independent, the timing consistent. Yet he knew how Goering would react. With laughter. With denial. With insults that turned reality into heresy. Outside the intelligence offices, life in Germany was tightening under air raids and ration cards. Yet inside, men debated whether a bomber an hour could truly exist. It was easier to believe in sabotage than in American genius. Each report sent upward through the command chain vanished into silence. No acknowledgement, no questions. Just indifference, a bureaucracy allergic to truth. By April, the Abwehr's own analysts had given up trying to convince their superiors. They simply documented, cross-referenced, filed away their findings like burial records for the Reich's future. The web was complete. The truth had been caught inside it, clear, undeniable, and destined to be ignored. The night was still when U-202 surfaced off Amagansett, Long Island, June 1942. 4 men climbed into the shallow surf, their boots sinking into wet sand. Their orders were clear: infiltrate, sabotage, and gather intelligence on American war production. Among them was George John Dash, a man who knew the United States too well to believe the myths he'd been told in Berlin. The submarine vanished into the black water behind them. Dash stood for a moment, watching the shorelights flicker. America had been his home for 2 decades. He'd worked in its factories, walked its streets, breathed its rhythm. He knew the tempo of its machines, and that tempo was faster than anything Germany could imagine. The plan was simple. Dash's team would blend in, collect data on aircraft output, and coordinate acts of sabotage. But as the days passed, a quiet war waged inside his mind. Berlin believed Willow Run was an American illusion. Dash had seen Detroit. He knew it wasn't. Within a week, his resolve cracked. In a Washington hotel room, Dash picked up the phone and made the call that would undo the mission. By the time the FBI walked in, he wasn't an enemy anymore. He was a man trying to stop a lie from consuming the world. During the interrogation, Special Agent Charles Landman leaned across the table. "Your orders?" he asked. Dash exhaled slowly. "To find proof," he said. "Berlin doesn't believe your factories can build a bomber every hour. They think Willow Run is a fairy tale. They wanted photographs, head counts, manifests, something to force Göring to see." Landman blinked. "They don't believe it?" Dash laughed bitterly. "I lived here. I saw the car plants before the war. If Ford can make a car a minute, they can build a bomber in an hour. But try telling that to men who think your workers are weak." What he revealed stunned his interrogators. German intelligence wasn't lacking information. It was drowning in it. What crippled them was belief. The leadership refused to accept what their own spies were proving. Dash signed the confession without hesitation. He had betrayed his mission, not his conscience. As he was led away, he thought of the men in Berlin who still mocked the reports, who still clung to their racial certainties. They would never believe him. They didn't need to. The bombers would prove it for him soon enough. April 20th, 1943, Hitler's birthday. At Karen Hall, Hermann Göring's private hunting estate, the air was thick with cigar smoke and self-congratulation. In the center of a grand oak table lay not trophies or feasts, but documents, photographs, and intelligence reports. The truth, arranged like evidence before a court. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris stood at the head of the table. He had rehearsed this moment in silence, knowing how it would unfold. To one side, Göring leaned back in a chair carved with imperial eagles, heavier than ever, his arrogance swelling with him. Around them gathered generals, aides, and men accustomed to applause, not mathematics. Canaris opened the folder and began methodically. 17 independent sources, he said evenly. Sweden, Spain, Mexico, Japan, each confirms the same production rate. Ford's Willow Run is producing one B-24 bomber every hour. This has been consistent since January. He laid down photographs, an endless assembly line stretching toward vanishing points. Manifests showing millions of pounds of aluminum. Reports stamped by foreign intelligence. A mosaic of undeniable facts. Göring picked up one photo, smirked, and tossed it back. "Wooden mock-ups," he said. "Clever propaganda. Americans build sausages, not bombers." Canaris kept his tone level. 650 aircraft per month. At a single plant. If this data is correct, if, Göring snapped, being the important word. He reached for another document, pretending to read. "Canaris, you let your agents be fooled. The Americans want us to fear them. A fairy tale with rivets." Hitler entered moments later, flanked by generals and Goebbels. His presence thickened the room like a storm front. Canaris repeated his presentation with military precision. Every number, every corroboration. When he finished, silence hung between them like a drawn blade. Hitler tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Admiral, are you seriously suggesting that a mongrel nation of workers, women, and Jews builds bombers like toys?" "I'm stating," Canaris answered carefully, "that their production is real. And if we don't adapt, enough." Hitler's voice was sharp, final. "They can mass-produce washing machines. Not precision aircraft. We prepared for war in 6 years. They claim to do this in 16 months. It's impossible." One of the generals cautiously raised the possibility of even partial accuracy. Hitler cut him off. "Even a quarter of these figures are lies." The moment stretched. Canaris understood it was over. Not the argument, but the war itself. The truth could not be spoken in this room. It could not be acted upon anywhere. Göring laughed again, the sound hollow against the walls. "Canaris, you've been reading too many American fairy tales." Canaris gathered his papers slowly, almost reverently, as though packing away a verdict. Outside, Spring light flickered through the pines of Caron Hall. Inside, men in uniforms had chosen denial over arithmetic. The bombers were already being built. The future was already decided. But power, wrapped in ideology, refused to look. After Caron Hall, the truth kept arriving like clockwork. Aerial photographs, smuggled through Spain, showed the Willow Run complex from above, an ocean of steel and concrete, rail lines branching like veins, and rows of freshly completed bombers parked at the airfield. Analysts counted 47 aircraft ready for delivery in a single frame. Photo interpreters measured the spacing on the line, the size of parking lots, the volume of incoming freight cars. Every calculation confirmed what Göring had mocked. The Americans weren't boasting, they were building. The reports landed on Albert Speer's desk, and unlike many of his peers, he understood what they meant. He didn't laugh. He didn't argue. He simply stared at the numbers. In his private notes, he wrote, "If Willow Run's figures are even half true, then we face annihilation, not defeat." Speer had spent years studying production curves. He knew how much time, steel, labor, and energy it took to build a single aircraft in Germany. To match Willow Run, the Reich would have needed an entire second nation. That nation did not exist. Intelligence officers tried again to elevate their findings, but the leadership no longer cared. Truth had lost to ideology. In a system where contradiction meant death, silence became safer than accuracy. Canaris and his deputy Hans Oster even acquired short film footage, 5 minutes of the assembly line in motion, shot covertly and smuggled through Switzerland. Conveyor belts. Workers swarming like synchronized gears. A clock visible on the wall confirmed the timing. A bomber passed the lens every hour. Oster whispered only 2 words when the reel ended. "It's true." Canaris burned the film that night. If they presented it, they'd be accused of treason. The Reich was not failing for lack of intelligence. It was failing because it refused to believe its own. By late 1943, among the analysts, the tone had shifted. They no longer debated whether Willow Run's numbers were real. They debated how long Germany could survive against them. The answer grew shorter with each passing month. February 1944. The first wave came at dawn. Formation after formation of American heavy bombers slicing through the gray sky over Germany. The operation would be remembered as Big Week. For the first time, the Luftwaffe saw the full weight of Willow Run in the air. Each B-24 Liberator glimmered like a silver blade, engines humming in perfect rhythm. To the defenders on the ground, it seemed endless. Factories, airfields, and refineries became pinpoints on Allied maps, targets chosen with ruthless precision. Germany's skies turned into a conveyor belt of destruction, echoing the very conveyor belt that had built the planes. In Luftwaffe. Command rooms. Officers stared at radar screens gone black with aircraft silhouettes. This was no longer theory. This was Willow Run translated into war. Major Ritter, the analyst who had warned early, watched from a communications post as the reports poured in. Hundreds of bombers, thousands of tons of ordnance, hours apart. He whispered to no one in particular, "This is the math we tried to show them." When D-Day came in June, the bombers were no longer counted. They were constant. Willow Run alone was sending nearly 500 aircraft a month into the skies. Other American plants joined the chorus, multiplying the storm. The Luftwaffe, starved of fuel, pilots, and replacements, shattered. Albert Speer later admitted in private that Germany lost the war not in 1944, but in 1942, when they laughed at the numbers. The skies simply delivered the verdict. Göring's bravado turned to silence. He stopped mocking Willow Run. He rarely spoke of production anymore. He had seen too many bombers to deny them now. For civilians in German cities, the sound of distant engines became part of daily life. Sirens followed. Darkness followed sirens. Fire followed darkness. Each B-24 in the sky was a consequence of a folder ignored, a warning dismissed. And for the men in intelligence, the ones who had counted, verified, and been ignored, the sight was not triumph or vindication. It was confirmation of a tragedy they had seen coming. The bombers had become history's punctuation. Every hour they flew, the end of the Reich drew closer. By April 1944, the numbers that had once sounded like fantasy were simply routine. Willow Run reached its peak production rate, one finished B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. 2 shifts, 9 hours each, 6 days a week, an unrelenting rhythm of steel, rivets, and purpose. But aircraft rolled out in 468 hours that month. 42 out of 331 workers made it happen. 11,000 of them were women. 3,800 were Black Americans. 200 lived with disabilities. All worked side by side under the same roof, something Nazi ideology considered unthinkable. Every bomber that left the line carried not just explosives, but proof that the Reich's core beliefs were wrong. Democracy had not fractured production. It had amplified it. A workforce the Nazis would have dismissed as unfit outproduced the so-called master race by orders of magnitude. For the engineers at Ford, this was logistics and labor. For German intelligence officers, it was the ghost in every sky. Their reports had described this scale in detail 2 years earlier. Leadership had turned away. The plant itself was a marvel of human coordination, a mile-long assembly line where fuselages and wings met with clockwork precision. It was a city, disguised as a factory, devouring raw materials and exhaling bombers into the sky. Outside, fleets of finished aircraft filled the adjacent airfield, row after perfect row. Trains and trucks carried materials in, aircraft flew out. The machine never slept. What Germany had dismissed as impossible had become a daily schedule. Willow Run didn't just produce planes, it produced inevitability. In the end, it wasn't that Germany didn't know. It was that those who held power chose not to believe. The numbers were delivered in black and white. The reports were clear. The photographs were undeniable. Yet at every turn, the truth was bent, buried, or mocked. Because of that refusal, Germany built its war strategy on illusions. Fighter production lagged while resources bled into miracle projects. Defensive planning imagined hundreds of bombers, not thousands. Diplomacy stalled because defeat was never accepted as certain, even when the math said otherwise. By the time the bombers filled the skies, it was too late to correct course. Willow Run had become the invisible front line, its mile-long assembly line dictating the rhythm of the war, far from any battlefield. Every hour, another aircraft emerged, a machine designed to crush the myth of invincibility. Albert Speer saw it with an economist's clarity. He wrote privately that Germany had been defeated not in the air, but in the mind. Intelligence officers whispered the same truth among themselves. The Reich was not destroyed by superior espionage, but by its own arrogance. The consequences were catastrophic. Cities were leveled, supply lines fractured, morale collapsed. Millions died in a war prolonged by the refusal to acknowledge reality. A single factory in Michigan, powered by democracy, diversity, and industrial genius, had outproduced an empire built on racial hierarchy and fear. After the war, the surviving German intelligence officers spoke with bitter precision. They had collected the truth early. They had counted every bomber before it was ever built. But their warnings were treated as weakness, their accuracy as betrayal. Germany, one officer wrote, did not die from lack of intelligence. It died from lack of wisdom. That is the enduring lesson of Willow Run. Truth does not bend to ideology. Arithmetic does not care for pride. Nations that ignore what they know will be crushed by what they refuse to believe. Willow Run built 8,685 bombers. But what it truly produced was proof that belief does not change reality. Only action does. And the cost of denial can be measured not in numbers, but in lives.